Okay, so what I was going to do here after the break, I was going to come back and just kind of solve some plant problems and identify a few mysteries. This is, and what I do this every year with my local master gardeners. And what I do is I save pictures of the samples that have been sent to me the previous year. So summer of 2016, I took pictures of things that came in. People sent me pictures, and I just save them every year. And then every year we go through, okay, this is what we had last year. And I try to do something that's a little new, a little different, but also always try to cover some of the common things because those are the questions we're going to answer the most. So here's, why do my pine, and the question is the actual homeowner's question. Why do my pine trees appear to have soap on them? And the first one, this was one, 35 years, I never had this question. And what it actually is it was kind of interesting. It does look like soap. I'm like, are they fooling me? Are they tricking me? Or what's the case here? But what happens is kind of a crude, when it's really dry weather or hot, dry weather, kind of a crude soap can actually develop on the outside of pine trees. And then if it gets really, or other trees as well, but it's most common with pine trees. You know, they used to make pine tar soap. So it's just kind of a mixture of salts and acids and whatnot, and they kind of dry and get on the outside of the stem. And then if it gets really wet and rainy, they actually suds up and bubble up. So this gentleman sent me a picture of probably about 10 pine trees, and every one of them was doing it. So natural. It's really natural, a little bit unusual, but completely natural. And not harmful to the tree, other than a sign that it probably had been a little hot and dry. So that was a new one to me, kind of a fun one to get. I wish we could interact a little bit more. That's one thing I don't like about Zoom, is I can't see your guys' chat right down in the corner, but here we go. I gotta read it. Spittlebugs, yep. You know what, it does look like spittlebugs, but it was not spittlebugs. Let me go back. Okay. There is an insect called the spittlebug and you often see it around the stem, smaller around the stem of a plant frequently. And usually if you go in there and you start taking your hand and feeling it, you'll actually find the insect inside there. But it looks, spittlebug looks just like this on a plant. Only it's usually on the stem or closer to the leaves. It's usually not flowing down the side of the pine tree. So in this case, it was actually a natural thing rather than spittlebugs, but good job, Panhandle. What's wrong with my peony leaves? Okay. And the answer here, now I did provide, if you want to, I know my slides, if you only have the 6 per page, they're a little bit small. So I did, I don't know if you have it or if your educator gave it to you, your coordinator gave it to you, but it's just the answer and recommendation for plant diagnostics, and then it's just 1 through 10 on the front and 11 through 20 on the back. And if you want to write your answers there so you can write them a little bit larger, feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can write it on the slide as well. But the issue here was powdery mildew. And I include, you know, even though powdery mildew is a very common problem we see in the landscape on lilacs, especially sometimes we'll see it in shady areas of the lawn. We're starting to see it a little bit more often on peonies. That's not something we've typically seen it on often, but we're starting to see it a little bit more frequently for some reason. But of course, with powdery mildew, again, this is a little bit different fungal disease. It doesn't have to be really wet and rainy to see a lot of powdery mildew. Usually we see it where the plants is in some shade or poor air circulation. So site location is very important. If it's becoming bad enough that they do want to attempt to control it, at this stage it's too late. Unless it's pretty early in the spring and a lot of the other leaves are not yet infected, then you know, a fungicide may help at that point. But usually if it's later in the season, then the key is sanitation. Once you can, in the fall, rake up the damaged leaves, in the fall, cut the plant back. And then if you would want to apply a fungicide, it would have to be done as those leaves are starting to grow in the spring to really be effective. So powdery mildew on peonies. What is on my maple branch? And the leaves are kind of sticky too. You can kind of see here where the leaves are a little bit shiny, so they felt sticky as well. Okay. This particular problem is actually woolly aphids. There are some scale insects that, especially cottony maple scale, but it looks a little bit different. But aphids, as well as scales, can make the leaves sticky because they feed on the sap of the plant, and if they can't digest all the sap of the plant, they kind of exude it out of their bodies, and that's what makes the leaves kind of sticky. So, but this is I said woolly aphids. They're kind of peculiar. The nymphs here are kind of purplish. As the season goes on, they kind of develop these little waxy filaments, and that's where they get the name woolly aphids. We've been seeing a little bit more of them the last couple of years, but as a general rule, they're not a real issue. It's something that a homeowner could definitely ignore if they would choose to ignore it. So woolly aphids on maple. What are these berries, and can I eat them? This was a picture that was sent to me, actually from another county. They look delicious, but they are common pokeweed, and they are actually toxic. Now, this is one of those native plants that grows where if you start to read more about it, you will read that certain parts of the plant at certain times of the year was actually eaten by pioneers, by the Native Americans, but it had to be done correctly. It had to be, prepared correctly. But as a general rule, this is a plant that we would tell people it's a weed and it is toxic. So no, do not eat those berries. And I would encourage you as master gardeners, be 120% sure of your identification, especially when people are asking, can I eat it? Either choose not to answer it, turn it over to the extension person, or be 150% sure of your plant ID. But this is common pokeweed. I'm a commercial grower and my onions are turning white and brown and drying up. What's wrong? Here, I want somebody to tell me what the answer is to this. And I have 2 checks. Okay, Elizabeth said common pokeweed, good job, at least in Paul County. What was that name again? It was, well, common pokeweed. That's probably Elizabeth was answering. Common pokeweed. The Panhandle says that the problem here is mites. Betty is asking, does the red stem help indicate toxicity? Not that I'm aware of. I assume you're saying, could any red-stemmed plant be toxic? I don't believe so. Thrips, the Panhandle also says thrips. I am asking, what would a master gardener answer to this question? Kind of a trick question. You are a master gardener and you have been given this question. As a master gardener, what is your answer to the client? Okay, well, your answer is, first of all, state policy does not allow master gardeners to answer questions of commercial growers. So your answer is, I need to refer this to the extension staff. But the answer is, let's see, is thrips. This is thrip damage on onions. They kind of scrape the plant and the leaves with their mouth parts. At this stage, with this much damage, it would be almost impossible to control thrips. They need to be controlled very early in the season. But I intentionally put this in just as a reminder that if somebody says they're a commercial grower, state policy says that those questions should be turned over to the extension staff. This vine is growing on my shrub. Is it poison ivy? How do I control it? There you go, Dakota County, you got it. Ask more questions and turn it over to an expert. I'm giving you a little bit of time to answer. I'm hoping that this allows some for discussion just locally. People to do some sharing. Virginia creeper, you're right, Nicole. This is Virginia creeper. This is a vine that people very often think is poison ivy, but it has the leaves of, it has 5 leaflets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did this one have 6? Maybe 6. But Virginia creeper is one of our native vines. In the fall, it's very bright red, beautiful purplish red, but so is poison ivy. But poison ivy, again, will have the 3 leaflets. Leaves of 3, leave it be. So if it's growing, and this one is planted by a lot of birds because it has a purple berry that birds do love to eat, so it is often planted in our shrub borders, fence lines. It's a beautiful vine, but it's very vigorous, and it would take over a shrub area eventually. And this is one where, again, about the only way to control it is with that glove method. You can possibly keep pruning it off at ground level, and eventually it would run out of stored food, but you'd really have to, the homeowner would have to keep up with continually pruning that off at ground level. Otherwise, many of you have heard of the glove method, where you put the chemical resistant glove on, put a cotton glove over that, spray it with Roundup, and then you just kind of reach in and you grab the leaves and you try to get as much on the Roundup on the leaves as you can and get very little of it on the green tissue of your shrub. So a little bit challenging, but that is the answer. Okay, why are my maple leaves turning brown and some are falling off? Okay, I know that the panhandle here is saying it can kill trees. I've never seen Virginia creeper kill a tree, but I suppose if the tree's small enough and it shades it out enough over time, it could eventually kill the tree. Oh, good question. What time of the year is it? It is probably June, early June. Late May, early June. You guys must have a vigorous Virginia creeper out in the panhandle. Yeah, in Buffalo County, if you want to take a break, do you mean everybody? Or do you guys just want to step away? The panhandle says yeah. Yes to the break. I'm fine with taking a 10-minute break. Keep going. No. What do I do? Let's keep going. I think.
Hey, Kelly, this is Tim. I'm getting a red recording dot, so it may in fact be recording even though it told me I needed.
Oh, great, great. Well, I think the majority is keep going. So we'll do the democratic process and go with the majority. This is anthrax, and we're going to finish early. So you're not going to, we're going to finish early anyway. So we're on number 7. I'm going to 20. So you won't have to sit here for 2.5 hours without a break. But the answer to number 7 is this is anthracnose. Again, it's a disease. We kind of had a wet spring last year, and after wet springs, we see anthracnose. Now, anthracnose is the name of a symptom, kind of like a headache. And we see it in trees, typically maple, walnut, ash. But I want to emphasize that it's actually a related fungus, but a slightly different fungus that infects each of those separate trees. So the one that infects maple won't infect walnut or ash. But as a rule, if it's a wet, rainy spring, we'll often see anthracnose in all of those tree species commonly. But maple seems to be most common. And you can tell it's anthracnose because the lesions will often follow the veins. You know, it's not like scorch where it's just on the edges of the leaves mostly, but it tends to follow the veins. And the leaf can get a little bit crinkled. This is what you're going to hear me say a lot of times, that this is one of those diseases that does not need to be controlled. And we have so many more of those than we have diseases that must be controlled. But it'll cause the leaves, some of the leaves will get bad enough and a few of them will drop off. But two key reasons why it doesn't need to be controlled is it often infects the leaves early in the spring, and only a few of them will drop off. But it's early enough in the season that the tree, if it needs to, if there's fairly heavy defoliation, that a healthy tree will just send out new leaves in relief. And this happens, sycamore is most commonly infected with anthracnose and the most severely infected. A sycamore can be infected early in the spring and drop close to 100% of its leaves. And an otherwise healthy tree will typically relief. And our temperate zone trees have the ability to do that because they have secondary buds, and they have the ability to do that because it's not unusual where we get a late spring freeze. And a lot of those leaves are damaged by a late spring freeze, and the tree will develop that secondary bud and shoot it out so it has enough foliage to get it through the summer. So anthracnose